Hey, Tom.
Hey, Jen.
What are you listening to this week? Welcome to season 5 of What Are You Listening To? The weekly podcast created to foster community through music by sharing the stories behind the songs that soundtrack our lives. Some of the songs are old, some new, all good. I'm Jenn Tully, and this week I'm joined by Tom Monahan. Tom is one of the hosts, aka complainers, of the 1001 Album Complaints podcast. 1001 Album Complaints is a weekly podcast where a group of lifelong friends and musicians go through Robert Dimery's book, 1001 Albums You Must Hear Before You Die, to determine if you do, in fact, need to listen to a particular album before you die. The music commentary is spot on, informative, and often hilarious. This week, Tom and I are going to get to know each other through 4 songs. 2 are his picks and 2 are mine. We'll discuss the power of live music, listening to music for a living, and old songs that still sound good. Which songs do you think we're going to discuss? Tune into our conversation to find out. And in case our song picks are new to you, we'll publish a playlist with the episode so you don't miss a beat. Tom, I'm so excited to have you on the show. I cannot wait to start talking about your picks, my picks, get into it. So let's dive right in. What are you listening to this week?
Well, thank you, Jen. I am super excited to be on myself. I think it's a fantastic way to get to know people. I've always said that
Yes.
music bridges all of the gaps. If you want to understand somebody, ask them what their favorite song is. Ask them what song makes them cry. Ask them what song they want played at their funeral. Stuff like that. That's going to tell you a lot of what you need to know about a person. And as a lifelong listener and appreciator of music, I have found that most of the friends that I have made, that's one of the first things we talk about. We talk about music. We talk about where we were when we heard songs, what it meant to us. And you think back to all these really important moments of your life, especially when you're like younger and like probably doing a bunch of stuff you weren't supposed to. The songs that were
Yes.
playing in that car when you were driving around, that's really what defines this really, important periods of your life.
Yes, and it
Eh,
allows you to drop right in, right? Like you can go right to a time and place that matters to somebody. Like you don't have to spend a whole lot of time of like, what do you do? Where are you from? Taking a
Yeah.
song and like you said, just like reliving it immediately like drops you into a point in time in someone's life. And I love that. I can't think of any other thing that kind of gets you right into it better than a song or music.
Yeah, and you, like myself, are a parent. And so
Yes.
you end up having to have these kind of friendships with your kids' friends' parents. And so what are you going to talk about? Oh, what do you do for a living?
Right.
That gets real boring. It's like, what's the last show that you saw? That's a good conversation starter. People are immediately like, oh, I actually want to talk about that. I don't want to talk about work. I've been talking about that all day.
Yes. Yes. You're right.
Yeah.
That's like the trailer. We're going to just encapsulate that and that's going to run before the show henceforth.
Excellent. All right. So I got to pick 2 songs for this, and I think we're
Yes.
going to dive right into my first one here. It
Tell
is a
me.
song that I sadly only recently started listening to, and I wish
Oh.
I had listened to it before. It is the song Right on Time by Brandi Carlisle.
Oh, this song, like I have been listening to it. I think it came out. It was on the In These Silent Days album from 2021. And so I found this like we were still kind of like it was still pandemic life whenever I think I first heard this. And oh man, tell me how you discovered it if it was recently. Like how did this song come into your life and what does it mean to you? So how does it feature so prominently that it was something you were listening to this week?
Well, I actually first heard of Brandi Carlisle when she did that duet with Alicia Keys, A Beautiful Noise. And I
Mhm.
adore Alicia Keys. I think she is extraordinarily talented.
Yep.
And I heard this song and it's like, there's somebody else on here who not only can stand up to Alicia Keys and all that she brings to the table, not only is holding her own, but I think might actually be performing a little better than her there. And there's something about Brandi Carlisle's voice that really transported me. And you can go into like the technical aspects of it. She has this amazing vibrato in her
Yep.
voice. and not just one speed of vibrato. A lot of people will have a natural vibrato and they have one speed and they kind of just do that. That's their natural singing voice. But she has this control to be able to change it and alter it for the part. And so when she's
Mm.
singing a little bit more softly, it's a little quicker. She gets really high on some of those belty notes and kind of slows down a little bit. Like that's the hallmark of just an absolute professional.
Yeah, and her voice is just so powerful. I feel like she can just fill a space like no other. Like, I love to listen to her music loud and like you don't really necessarily think about when you think about Brandi Carlisle, you don't think about like rocking out in your car, like loud, but her voice is so strong and so powerful that I love listening to it at like max volume.
Absolutely, absolutely. And frankly, when at the end of the song, she does that, it wasn't right. Just that's
Oh,
that second note up. Like I didn't think that that was possible. When you first hear that belted note at the end of the chorus, you're like, wow, that's an impressively high note. And then at the end, she's like, oh, I could have gone higher the whole time. I was
yeah.
saving it for you. It's so great.
Yeah. Well, and everything, like I one of the notes I made about this song is just that crescendo is everything, right? Like getting to that big buildup of when she like really lets you have it. You're just like, oh my gosh. Like this woman is such a powerhouse. Like I just like the power behind her. I keep saying it, but it just and it's not just this song. I just find that to be true about all of her music, really.
Sure. And her super group, the Highwomen,
Yeah.
also have done some great stuff. I feel
Yeah.
like she's one of those artists that, again, I feel very late to the game. Everybody that I have mentioned Brandi Carlisle to in the last year has just been like, "Oh yeah, you didn't know about her? She's amazing." I've been listening to her for, and I have my brother-in-law is like a big '90s grunge guy, super
Oh.
into that. And I was like, okay, I might be able to introduce him to some, but he's a music fan. I was like, I might be able to introduce him to some good music. And he's like, oh no, I totally know her. She's played with Pearl Jam. Like they love her and they rep her for a while. And it's like, apparently everybody knew about her before me.
Yeah. Well, she's been too, like and I love that she is also bringing back people that have influenced her too. Like that's another thing that I love about Brandi Carlisle in addition to her voice and the power and like these amazing crescendos that she builds into her songs is like, she kind of like brought back Tanya Tucker, right? Like Tanya Tucker nobody was listening to. She was
Hmm.
kind of like off the scene, off the map, off the radar. And for like a Texas gal, I grew up listening to Tanya Tucker. Like she was a big part of my life. So I'm grateful for Brandi Carlisle for sort of like putting a spotlight on her. Same thing for Joni Mitchell, getting Joni Mitchell to perform in public when she hadn't in so many years. Like I think that speaks to probably the kind of powerful person that Brandi Carlisle is, in addition to just being a powerful singer and an amazing entertainer. I think she's
Yeah.
probably got to be a pretty amazing person too.
Yeah. So she is, this song is not particularly country, but she kind of came up through the
Yeah.
country scene. And being gay in the country scene was not exactly run of the mill, shrug it off.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like if you're a pop star, nobody thinks twice about it. But she was, I really appreciate somebody who is just their authentic self the
Yeah.
entirety of their career, even if it might inhibit their career at some point. She's like, no, this is who I am. And I know she has a charity that she runs as well. It's you think about people like this, like kind of the strength that you have to be able to, be your authentic self the entirety
Yes.
throughout a career, especially in the music industry where everybody's trying to put you into a box and everybody's trying to craft your image and get you to be one thing or the other. And I don't get the sense that she's a crafted image. I get the sense that she's just like a good person. Seems like the kind of person I'd like to have a beer with, go to a picnic with, or something like that.
Yeah, same. If you get that invite, bring me. I'm your plus
Oh
one
yeah,
because
exactly.
I want to be at that picnic.
Brandi,
And
you
just
can call me directly. You don't have to go through
yeah,
my assistant or anything. We're cool.
it's fine. It's
Yeah,
fine, right? Yeah. Well, she's, I'm sure that I've got her in my Rolodex. As I say a term, people are like, "What's a Rolodex, Jen?"
exactly. Yeah.
She's in my contacts, right?
Yes, yes.
Um, well,
And I
and like
think
it.
actually her and I were only born a couple of weeks apart. So we're,
Oh,
we're the
really?
same age. Yeah.
Okay.
Right around the same age.
There you go. Well, and like
Yeah.
another fun fact before we transition to your second song, she also has Shooter Jennings. Back to talking about her country roots. Shooter Jennings, who's Waylon Jennings' kid, is plays organ on this song. And if you have not seen the video, it's actually a pretty good video. I haven't watched a lot of music videos, but this one came to my attention because it was directed by Courtney Cox from Friends,
Oh,
who was
interesting.
discovered, for those that don't know, in a Bruce Springsteen video, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Remember
Dancing in
that?
the Dark. Oh, yeah.
That's right. So it kind of
Oof.
comes full circle here, all the way
Yeah.
around.
It's a nice lead in to the next song, bringing it back to the 70s, right?
Here we go. That's
Yeah.
the perfect setup. So tell me, I cannot wait to get into this one. Tell me about your second pick.
My second pick is Watching the Detectives by Elvis Costello, a song that I picked because I am convinced that this is the coolest song of all time.
Okay, okay. Well, I'm going to disagree with you only because when Rob, your fellow complainer, was on the show, I actually, one of my picks was an Elvis Costello song. And my favorite Elvis Costello song is a beautiful, beautiful ballad, totally different from this song called Shipbuilding. It was a Robert Wyatt song, actually, and Elvis Costello is very gracious about that. But yeah, I love Elvis Costello, and I just thought when I saw this, I was like, "That's so crazy that you're bringing an Elvis Costello song." And then when I had Rob on, I brought an Elvis Costello song, so he's definitely a through line here for us. So
Oh, yeah.
tell me,
He's a powerhouse, too.
tell me why this one. I mean, there are so many amazing things about this song, but tell me why for you this song.
So I have been a bass player for the last 30 years, basically. I love being in the rhythm section. I played the drums for several years in a band, and I think that the rhythm section on this song absolutely defines the song, blows it out of the water, and it's the interplay between the instruments is just so damn cool and slick and a little dirty. The drums are overblown a little bit, and it gives it this mysterious vibe that I think absolutely perfectly fits the subject matter of the song. I mean, it doesn't get any better than when you say visible shivers running down my spine. We get that
Ah,
little diddle-doo going on. It's
the piano.
beautiful. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
It's such a it's just a cool song. And I started listening to this when I was in high school. And it kind of redefined to me what you could bring to a rock song
good.
because it's kind of reggae, but it
Yeah.
also definitely rocks. And I was a little stuck in playing music that was 90s grunge. It's very straightforward. It's a lot of, just hammer on a root note and then go to the fifth, that kind of stuff. And this was like this melding of sounds that turned into a different new sound, which is like detective, like mystery rock or something like that. I was like, it's so cool to again be able to just kind of take all these influences and incorporate them. And then also the fact that this wasn't even his band. He just kind of grabbed that rhythm section and was like, I just want to do this song. They're like, hey, how about we just rip one of the most iconic rhythm parts of all time? And then, we'll just go do our thing again with Graham Parsons,
Yeah.
or Graham
See,
Parker, not Graham Parsons.
yeah,
Jesus.
Graham
Sorry.
Parker.
Yeah.
But and like the other thing too, like I say this a lot on the show. I have zero musical talent. I don't play any instruments. You do not want to hear my singing voice, like none. So my contribution to musicians is that musicians need fans, right? So I'm a super fan. That's my talent. When people are like, "Oh, you host a music podcast? What do you play?" I'm like, records.
Yeah.
That's what I play. But I love this song lyrically. I get everything you're saying about the music, especially the reggae feel. It opens with the drums and then kind of goes right into that reggae beat. It makes it immediately recognizable. But I love the lyrics in this song. They're so clever. The title's catchy. You're already thinking like watching the detectives, what's this about? And the line that has stood out since the first time I heard the song to when I was listening to it this week prepping for the show. She's filing her nails while they're dragging the lake.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, it's so good. It's so good.
So I had never dug into what the song was really about. I think I maybe took everything at face value and assumed that it was like somebody who had murdered somebody and is like very calmly just watching the detectives try to solve the mystery and like
Yeah.
is unaffected by it because they're super cool. I didn't realize that he's talking about a person who's watching detectives on television, watching
Yeah.
all this terrible, crazy stuff is happening, and it's just water off their back. Not they're not impacted by any of the murder and all that stuff because it's just entertainment to them. I was like, oh, that's so smart. It's such a good subject matter for a song because I feel like that's true to this day. You got a couple laying in bed and one of them's like listening to a true crime podcast or something like that. You're like, yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah,
Well, and the other thing too that like struck me about this song is it was same thing. I dug in a little bit just because I'm an Elvis Costello fan, but like digging into it a little bit more and learning that he was influenced or this song in particular was influenced by the Clash. He was listening to that very first Clash album and didn't like it, kept listening like over and over. One night, I guess the story goes he'd listened to it like 3 or 4 times and it grew on him and he's like, I want to make something that sounds kind of like this or that sounds similar to this. So I'm immediately thinking, listening to this song, like, oh, like Train in Vain, blah, blah, blah. And then I start doing the math and looking at the years and like, no, that wasn't released until 78. This was 77 because that came out on the Clash's London Calling album. So I'm like, oh, he was like really like, I don't know, like pulling out things that were, I think, deep in like deep tracks or deep in the music of that first album that weren't so apparent. Because as soon as I saw that it was like a Clash influence, immediately Train in Vain popped in, and I'm like, oh yeah,
yeah.
Impossible. It was a year later.
Maybe
So,
he influenced them. Like,
right?
oh, he took our sound in a cool direction. Let's try to do that.
Let's do that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Have you guys done an Elvis Costello album on 1001 Album Complaints?
we have.
Have you? Okay.
Good Lord, which one did we do? Uh,
I
Good
mean,
Lord.
not critical. I was just, I'm like,
No, we did
that's one
Armed
that I,
Forces. That's what
oh,
we
okay.
did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It
Good
was a
one.
long time ago. It was 2021 was when
Oh,
we did it.
wow.
So it was a
Yeah.
while ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is a while ago. Well, it was funny too, like just looking through this, like, I mean, there are various places I think we all go to kind of pull the tidbits together for a show like this. But I kept like just Googling and looking for different things. And two random things that I ran across that I probably never needed to see was there was a movie in 2007 called Watching the
Yeah.
Detectives. And
Yes.
I was like,
Right.
what? Killian Murphy, Lucy Liu, Jason Sudeikis. I'm like, what? I
Yeah.
had no idea that there was a movie called that. And then also, this is terrible, but there is a Duran Duran version of this song from the mid 90s. I'm like, was Duran Duran a band in the mid 90s? I don't remember them recording then,
Well,
but it's terrible, actually.
they had what? Ordinary World was. They put
Was
that
it
out in the
that?
'90s.
They
Yeah, that
did,
was.
but I think that was
Yeah.
later. I don't think it's on the album that their cover of Watching the Detectives is on is called Thank You. And I don't think that's
Okay.
the album Ordinary World is on. But yeah, I was like, oh, this will probably be. I mean, I'm like a Duran Duran gal, like no shade to Duran Duran, but I heard this version and I was like, oh no, this is not, no boy, no. So skip the Duran Duran cover and just listen to the Elvis Costello version over and over.
Honestly, there are some songs that I always question, like, why would you cover it? There's not a better version of Watching the Detectives out there.
Yeah,
No need to redo that. Like, I will just listen to the original. I haven't heard it enough. I don't need to hear somebody else's interpretation of it. Sometimes you can have beautiful cover interpretations of songs, but if you're just doing like a pretty straight ahead version of Watching the Detectives, unnecessary.
agreed. Yeah,
Yeah.
agreed. And often too, I feel like sometimes, unless it has a completely different spin on it, like something that comes to mind is like Dwight Yoakam's version of "Purple Rain," right, by Prince. Like, I'm not sure if you've heard that, but
I
that's
have
like
not heard that, but
that's a crazy enough cover that you're like, oh, I didn't know Purple Rain could sound like a bluegrass song or, whatever, rockabilly, Bakersfield country, whatever genre you want to put Dwight Yoakam in. But yeah, like something like that has a fresh take on it. Like I could get behind, even though that's such a classic song. But yeah, Duran Duran version, or like them trying to reinterpret Elvis Costello didn't really work for me.
Yeah, it gets a little UB40 for me. When there's, well, I'm sorry, I always hold them up as like the most egregious, unnecessary cover band of all time. And made a millions of dollars off of it,
Yeah.
I'm sure. But oh, good Lord, I don't need to hear Red Red Wine anymore in my
Speaking
life.
of reggae, let's bring
Yeah,
up
yeah,
UB40.
yeah.
Well, and I'm curious too. Like, I know this is probably a hard question because I always, especially from musicians and like, people that love music, it's always hard to narrow down just two songs to bring to the show. So I'm going to ask you an equally difficult thing. What's been your favorite album to review on 1001 Album Complaints so far?
Um, I think it was Kid Rock's "Devil Without a Cause"
Oh my
because it
gosh.
sucked
I was going to
terribly,
say, please
and we
tell me
got to
because
just
it was so
piss
bad.
all over it. It was so bad. It's got the piss all over it, and like we did All Like Sushi, the Nena Cherry album, which is also pretty darn bad. But at some point, you feel a little bad ripping on somebody like Nena Cherry because she seems like a perfectly fine person. I
Right.
didn't have any of that with ripping on Kid Rock. I was pretty fine with ripping on Kid Rock.
You're like,
That was
it's
probably the
okay.
most fun. Yeah. But
Okay.
I would say that we covered that album by Spirit, The 12 Dreams of Dr. Sardonicus, a long time ago. And that was my favorite album that I'd never heard of before, and I still listen to it frequently to this day. That was a fantastic find, and the story behind
Okay.
the band was super cool. They were only known to me because they're the ones who sued Led Zeppelin for the Stairway to Heaven
Yeah.
plagiarism suit, and I think they might have had a case to be made there. They didn't win it, but I think they might have had a case. I was like, when I heard the two songs next to each other, I was like, they don't really sound all that much like each other. And then you're like, well, they had just toured with Zeppelin right before Zeppelin wrote Stairway to Heaven, and they were playing this song on that tour. And then Zeppelin kind of took something that was very similar and made, one of the,
Magic. And made
yeah, one of the
magic.
best selling singles of all time from it. So, I can see why they might be a little bitter about that. But that was my favorite album to find. But
Okay.
as people could probably tell from the name of the show, we like to complain about stuff and we like to rip on
Yes.
people. And sometimes you feel bad when they're totally nice people, but sometimes you don't feel bad at all. And Kid Rock was one of those, like Marilyn Manson was one of those, didn't feel
Yes.
bad at all. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and I think that's what's great about the show because you have so many different perspectives, and sometimes 3 of you like it and 1 of you hates it. Sometimes, like, it's very balanced in terms of, like, everybody's kind of weighing in, and I think I like that about it because, you get lots of different perspectives, and so I feel like there's something for everyone, and, I love the segments that you guys do. I obviously love, like, Tweet Linked Reviews, how you open the shows. I like the By the Numbers segment where you guys kind of pull random numbers and tie them to the band. So I think that there are so many great elements that you all pick and choose. But I was curious. I'm like, I wonder if there's like a favorite that stands out because that would be so hard to pick.
Yeah.
There's so many great episodes.
Well, I like how you say you get a whole lot of varied opinions from all middle-aged white guys who grew up in Wilmington, Delaware, and have known each other since we were like 4 years old.
Well,
Somehow we
that's who
still can
you
argue.
that's what I was gonna say. That's who you feel most free to like express your opinion with and like build a
Yeah,
case for. So
yeah.
I do love that you guys like nobody's trying to like tiptoe on the other person's feelings. It's like, no,
No,
you're
no, there's none of
crazy.
that.
That's crap,
Yeah,
like
yeah. Your musical tastes suck. I'm sorry.
yeah. It's
Yeah,
so funny.
yeah.
So I love that about it. But well, I kind of took as it's always funny when I'm trying to like put a playlist together. And I really do pick songs based on what I'm listening to. Now, often that'll be because I'll get a songs. And so I'll start listening to those. And then I'll just start like seeing where my Spotify goes from my guest picks. So sometimes they kind of mirror, they sound similar, or you can see the influence. And I think that this week was a case of that. I obviously love Brandi Carlisle. I love the song you chose. And so that pushed me into the direction of another band that I love that's a similar vein. And it is Boygenius. And I chose their song Not Strong Enough. I just love everything about this song. I think it's beautiful lyrically. I think that the harmonies are insane between these three people like they, I mean, it's just a beautiful, gorgeous, rich song. I love, the part in the middle, or sort of towards the end, where they sort of all go into this harmony piece where they keep repeating always an angel, never a god. And sort of this gender bending, the way that they position it, like not strong enough to be your man, is like these three women singing not strong enough to be your man. And so I just like I love this band. I know they've kind of like taken a break, and it's kind of three independent artists: Lucy Dacus, and Phoebe Bridgers, and Jillian Baker. Am I getting that right? And so they all have careers on their own, and so the word on the street is that Boygenius is kind of no more. But I sure hope that they come back and give us some more music. Was this a song that you knew? Is this a band you're familiar with? What was your take on this song?
So, not a song I knew, and
Okay.
not a band I was familiar with. And as much as I love doing my podcast, I have to listen to an album 15 to 20 times over the course of a week. I don't have a lot of let's just
Downtime.
explore and find new music listening. It's like comfort listening where I'm like, okay, I just need to decompress. I'm going to put on Harvest or something like that. Just something that I've heard a million times and I don't need to think about. And so I had not heard this band, but
Okay.
I agree with you. I think that I've always loved multiple singers in the song. And
Hmm.
as Rob has said many times, it just sounds like friendship when a bunch
Yes.
of people sing together. And especially when you have multiple women with very good, strong, controlled, powerful voices doing harmony together, there's something ethereal about it. There's something powerful about it, but it's beautiful. And I agree that always an angel, never a god part. They're moving through some very complicated chord changes with these harmonies and just nailing it every time. Very impressive. I was
And that's
curious who played drums on this song. Do you know which
I
one of them played the drums?
I don't know. I do not know. And I was just going to ask you another question too, like while we're in question mode, because I'm not a singer and I know you guys are all musicians. I Finding three-part harmonies like that is no small feat, right? Like that's hard to do. Is
It's
it or
hard. It's
no?
very hard to execute. The theory of it is you kind of just say, well, if I play this chord on the piano, let's just replace each one of these three notes with a voice. And that sounds simple. And you're like, oh yeah, just replace each one of these with a voice. But actually executing on it is not super easy. And especially when you have things that have to move in lockstep with each other, you have to be hitting those notes perfectly. And that's one of the things that whenever we record music, it takes a long time to build those background harmonies because if one is off, the whole thing sounds terrible. And actually,
Yeah.
if it's really, really close but not quite there, it sounds almost worse than if it's way off. And you're like, there's just something off-putting about that. And then you have to isolate each track, and then there's a lot of finger pointing. It's like I'm not the one who's off; you're the one who's off. It can be a little contentious.
Yeah, I love that. I feels like that you like, I think that's a great way to phrase it. We'll steal Rob's phrase. He's not here. It does. It
Yes.
sounds like friendship. It does. You can tell that these three women are very close to one another and they're great artistically together. I think they bring out the best in one another. This is definitely an instance for me where like the sum is the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Is that how it goes?
Yeah.
So I love that, and I do like Phoebe Bridgers a lot. Lucy Dacus, I haven't listened to as much, or Julian Baker, but I do like Phoebe Bridgers. But the three of them together is just magic to me. And I also have a soft spot in my heart for songs that reference other songs, and so I love it in the second verse when they talk about drag racing through the canyon, listening to Boys Don't Cry.
Yeah.
A reference to the Cure song. And so
Oh
that's
yeah.
always fun to me whenever a band like references another song in their song. So that's something that always catches my ear and that I look for.
Well, you'd think it would happen more because
Yeah.
obviously everybody who is dedicating their life to making music listens to a ton of music and is very inspired by a ton of music, but it's almost like people kind of pretend that like, oh no, I'm not borrowing from all of my influences to make this thing. It's like everybody is, and has been since the beginning of music, so there's nothing wrong with that. But I think some people are maybe hesitant to openly admit that like, yeah, I was listening to this song and it was totally inspiring me to write the song that I'm writing right now. Yeah.
Yeah, I respect it. I'm like mad respect for people that shout that out because I think it all like art is always going to influence other art, and I hope, and I love whenever it is called out explicitly like that. It makes me
Yeah.
happy.
You know,
Um,
before we move on, I do just want to say that I think that the production touches on the song are
oh,
really good and very well thought out. A lot of songs that have maybe less care put into them, everybody kind of starts playing and then they just play and then everybody stops at the end. And this has, the bass will come in and drop out, and it comes in tastefully and then it drops out, then it comes in forcefully when it comes back in, and it really elevates the song and moves it forward. And it's just, you can tell that these are pros, that this is not their first rodeo and they really know what they're doing.
well, and they do that again. I anybody that's ever even listened to the show once knows that I could spend my whole life talking only about lyrics. They're so important to me, and they do this thing in the song as well. And maybe there's a name for it, like musical terms. I don't know what it is. Maybe you do, but they do this thing where they leave, like intentionally, they leave these hanging sentences. So I don't know if you caught it in there, but like there's a section where she says, spinning out about things that haven't happened yet. And then she says, breathing in and out. And it sounds like the next line should be again, breathing in and out again. And then they do it again where she says, half a mind keeps the other second guessing, close my eyes and count. And it would fit perfectly to say to 10, but they don't. They like it's
Yeah.
and it has to be intentional because it's so natural to want to sing those words after, and I don't feel like I've ever heard or recognized that device so clearly in a song before. But it's got to be a deliberate choice. And I love that about this song too, that you get like, I find myself like when I'm singing, I want to finish it out with those words, but they left them out purposefully, I
Yeah.
think. And so it's that's a cool technique that I hadn't seen before that I loved about this song.
What's interesting is that actually happens in the Brandi Carlisle song as well.
Oh,
She said, I'm getting to the point where I can't carry on. I've never held my breath for quite this long, is the word
long.
she should say. But instead of saying that, she says, but and I don't feel ashamed. I did what I like. She cuts
Yep.
that off.
You're right.
But actually, what I thought was really interesting there is that this is the first time in the song that any harmony is introduced. And the harmony says the I've never held my breath for quite this long. So it kind of completes the line and
Mhm.
allows her to move forward. It's like that's just a pro move. That's somebody who is experienced in the studio and is like, I can solve this problem. Here's what we're gonna do, and it's gonna sound great and be additive.
Yeah, and it feels considerate. It feels like they're considering the listener, right? Like they're giving you something to like really dig into. And if you don't want to, it's a beautiful song. But if you do, if you really want to get in there, it's giving you something to chew on. Do you know what I mean? I love
Yeah.
that. It feels like they're respecting the listener. I like that.
Yeah, there's layers to it, which is
Ah,
it leads to repeat listens. And some songs are just fun, bubblegum pop. They don't warrant repeat listens or repeat active listens, but when you do actively listen to something several times and then find those gems, it's like, I've done the
love.
work and I was rewarded.
Yes, love. Well, and then speaking of simple little songs that you just can't shake, we're going to round out the playlist with my second pick is a favorite since I can remember listening to music, and it is With a Little Luck by Wings. So this is a song that is one of the like first songs that I kind of remember hearing on the radio as a kid driving around with my parents, and I always joke that Wings was my gateway drug to the Beatles, which everybody's like, how did that happen? How
Yeah,
did you
that's like
not discover the Beatles first?"
exactly heroin was your gateway drug to
Right.
pot or something like
Right.
that. Yeah,
I just do it backwards. I just like to be
yeah,
different. But it was because I was a kid, right? So I was growing up in the 70s. The song came out in 78. And so I remember hearing this on the radio, and this song was everywhere. Like I think the Billboard Hot 100 that year for 1978, it ended up landing in like the number 18 spot. Like it was on the radio all the time back when like that's all you had was just the radio. And so I remember hearing it and loving it. And this was a song that was mine. It wasn't my parents liked it, but so much of the
mm,
music that you hear when you're a kid is what your parents are listening to or what's on in the car. And this was a song that I found that I loved. And so I've just loved Wings ever since. They pop in and out of my life, and it's one of those bands where you kind of like whisper, like, yes, I like Wings, like you're not like, I'm not wearing my Wings t-shirt out, and like publicizing. And I'm like, but how can you hate on Wings, man? It's Paul McCartney. Like, you have
Well,
to
I
love
mean,
it some way.
I can start if you want. No, I feel like, especially in my friend group, everybody likes Wings, and I
Okay.
kind of stop talking when people talk about Wings because have I have a weird relationship with Wings. If you ask me if I like Wings, my answer is probably no. But
Okay.
if you play me a Wings song and say, "Do you like this song?" I'm like, "Yeah, I do like that song. It's actually a pretty good song." But I feel like I was always such a big Beatles fan, and my parents didn't listen to a lot of music. And so I didn't get a lot of Wings growing up. I did get the Beatles growing up because everybody gets the Beatles growing up.
Yes.
Kind of have to.
Beatles and
And
Elvis.
yeah. And so I've always thought that Paul McCartney is the better songwriter of John and Paul.
I agree.
Absolutely.
Yes.
But the best Paul is when John reins him in a little bit. There's nobody reining him in on Wings. And this song, again, it's a great song. I have no problem with the song. I don't think the synth has aged particularly well. It's a little bit of a kind of little cheese synth sound, but I get it was cutting edge at the time. I get it. But I feel like John would have been like, hey, that last like 90 seconds of the song where you just kind of go back to the thing that you did before? We don't need that. Let's either
Yes.
go to something different or just end the song. And I feel like Paul was getting challenged by John and by George, who's also a phenomenal songwriter.
Yes. Agreed.
And I don't think that in Wings there was somebody challenging him to take his game to the next level.
Yeah, and I think that there wasn't anybody challenging him to not be so self-indulgent a little bit. That's one thing that I will say about this song is it does feel very self-indulgent. And I made a note for those like people of a certain age. There is like it feels like it has a very like 10cc moment, that middle part where it's like where you get into like this very like airy thing and I'm like, "Oh, this is what we're doing." And the funny
Mm-hmm.
thing about it too is that even though it sounds like it was released before Watching the Detectives because it sounds older to me, but it was released after. And so that was kind
Yeah.
of telling for me too, as I was like, Watching the Detectives is a song that still sounds great today. And you can't necessarily place what era it's from. This one clearly lives in the late 70s, like you
Yeah.
definitely immediately know that that's where this song is from. And so that was something that I found interesting too. And, you also have, Moody Blues guitarist Denny Lane in the band. I mean, he threw Linda in there because, like, yay, like, they're a great love story. I'm not
Yeah.
whatever,
Exactly.
like,
He's
but
still pointing to John going, this is how you do this right, by the way.
yeah, yeah,
This is
yeah.
how you incorporate your partner in the correct way into a band.
Right. With
Yeah.
very minimal. That's how you
Yeah,
do it.
exactly. Yeah. And
But
she is very aware of what her role is. It's like,
exactly.
yeah.
I did think that so was making a note and I was like, I do find this band though like so easy to listen to, and I'm like, oh, hence easy listening. Like I feel like Wings is kind of like one of the bands that started that genre.
Yeah, yeah, and look, I mean, I'm a fan of excessive music as well. Like, I love Steely Dan. Steely Dan is
Yes.
nothing if not indulgent and excessive. And I don't know why. It's just always, for some reason, Wings has just never done it for me.
Hmm.
But I don't think that I can intelligently defend that position because again, you play me a Wings song, I'm like, this is actually a pretty damn good song. I
Pretty
would
good.
totally listen to this song again. Like this is I've noticed that I'm humming with a little luck, a little
Yeah.
luck, a little luck. Yeah,
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 totally. And he does like if there are a few things too. Like I love the way he's like, the way he sort of fits inclement weather into there by like
yes.
like
What willows
inclement.
turn away from inclement
Yeah,
weather? Yeah,
inclement, and you're like, well, like you mean like inclement, like
yeah,
and then he's like, if he can do it we can do it. You know, like he's
Yeah.
got like this weird thing happening where you're like, what's that about though, Paul? Like and you can like they know how to go off into weird, like probably my favorite Beatles album is Revolver. Not probably, it is. And so of course I like everyone will listen to Sergeant Pepper's and Magical Mystery Tour. Like I love the Beatles too, but Revolver is it for me. And so I'm like, there's a way, he knows there's a way to do some kind of kooky things, but keep it real. And then this one, like those two parts of this song are the two that, but maybe it's why I love it because as a kid that was silly and I felt like I could sing to that and be kind of silly. And so
Yeah.
maybe it all fits in.
Well, we talked about it before, but this the reality is Paul's a dork. And Paul was just being Paul. He was being his genuine self, He wasn't hiding it. It's like I was trying to be cool when I was hanging out with John, but now I'm completely free to just let my dork flag fly and let everybody know.
I like that though. If that's what was going on, then I can fully support that for Paul.
Yeah.
He had to keep it together for so long as like the nerd in this
Yeah.
cool band. And say
I'm
what you
tired of it.
will, but like John, Ringo, and George are pretty cool. Like
They
I think
are.
they're all three pretty cool.
Oh yeah. And Ringo might be the coolest of them all. He
Yeah.
really might. He was just like super laid back, he's like, I'm just gonna play my drums, underappreciatedly good drummer.
Yes.
And, also apparently was kind of from like a rough neighborhood and was like kind of a scrapper and would
Yeah.
throw down with people and stuff. So yeah, he
I
seems
love
like
that.
the probably the coolest one, the easiest one to hang out with. He wouldn't be trying to talk any highfalutin sense about the, Maharaja or anything like that.
No, no, no.
Yeah.
No, 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 no. He's
Yeah.
just keeping it real.
Yep.
He's grounded. Whereas, like, John's off in like ethereal land and Paul's kind of like nerding out and George is like very serious about his craft. I think of Ringo
Yeah.
as like,
Yeah.
yeah, whatever, man. Like, I'm just here for like the ladies and the drums. Like,
Exactly. You want to drink a beer and watch a football game or something like that? Yeah.
call Ringo.
Yeah.
Well, I love
So
that
I have a
we've,
question for you.
oh, you do. Yes.
And
Ask me.
yes, what do the two songs that I picked tell you about me? What do you know about me from the songs that I picked?
So I think from the songs that you picked, I can tell that I feel like you're a musician. I feel like you picked musicians' songs, right? Like there's a different kind of song that comes to the show whenever somebody's, if I have a politician or a writer, or like a prominent figure in Austin, like they'll bring a different kind of song than musicians. So that's the first thing I notice is like I'm dealing with a musician here. I'm dealing with somebody that loves good music and knows what that means. And that doesn't mean musicians can't like something kooky or silly, but that was the first thing that I gathered from these picks. And that you also too like to span decades and you're not just like locked into one time frame. You'd be surprised at how many people will like lock in and their two picks are like their favorite songs from high school, So I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, there's some range here, right? Like this is a person that's not afraid to explore decades or artists, or also too to branch out into something that's maybe a little bit different. I think that for a guy to bring the Brandi Carlisle song that's so like moody and rich and romantic, like again, that tells me like, oh, that's somebody that's like feeling the music too, not just listening to it. So I mean, that's sort of my informal take on what I was able to gather
Well, I mean,
from
that's
these
all
two
very
picks.
flattering. I appreciate that.
Well, I think that it rings true. And I think that, anybody too, like there are certain artists that like, I know we're going to have a good conversation if they bring this, and I think Elvis Costello is just kind of one of those tells for me. It immediately makes me excited because especially, I don't know if you feel this way, but songs that I know or artists that I like, I love hearing other people's takes, even if it's different than mine. And I talk a lot about one of the things I love about music is just how songs can hold so much for different people. They can mean different things. They can be important to you at different times in your life. They can, appear, disappear, reappear, and mean something completely different all three times they show up in your life or whatever. And so I love that about music. And I think part of it is like understanding why certain songs move people differently. And for me, it often goes back to lyrics. And so I love hearing from you, like, oh, it's the production that's amazing too. Or, oh, it's, musically, I love the way that the song progresses. Like, that's cool to me because it just makes the song that much richer in my mind.
Yeah, I do have a degree in English, but I'm the terrible lyric writer. And so I'm like, I'll stick to what I know. I think I gravitate towards interesting production choices and rhythmic changes because it makes me think about the process of making music. And
Hmm.
like making an album is a series of hundreds of individual decision points that all kind of build on top of each other to make this house of cards that ends up being an album. And you can sort of trace some of these decision points to decision points down the road for like, oh, because you decided to leave this space here, you had to put something else in there. And so that's where this part came from. That I find that stuff to be kind of fascinating. It's like a puzzle that you're kind of unraveling as you're listening to a song intensely over and over again.
Well, and so complicated. Like, that's the thing that amazes me about just like the production or like the putting together of an album and what that must be like is it's so complicated. There's so many moving parts and so
Yeah,
many factors that are unpredictable and so much magic that probably happens unexpectedly. And are you able to capture it? And if you didn't, can you recreate it? And, I mean, it's like anything. I think there's so much like art and science into building something, especially something timeless. Like, I think the Brandi Carlisle song is going to be around forever. I think people are going to be listening to that song in 100 years. I don't think that that song is ever not going to be powerful. And that's amazing to me that people are able to create something like that.
yeah, it's like a new addition to the Great American Songbook. I agree, especially on the Brandi Carlisle song, because it
Yeah.
seems that while I don't think it needs to have anybody else do it, it is the kind of thing that a person could sit down at a piano and play
Mhm.
that song and you have the sheet music and be like, okay, this is just a song that I can play along to. There's nothing crazy complicated. It's not a yes song or anything like that. We're like,
Right.
now I'm on movement 14. And, it's just a good, straight ahead, genuine song. And that kind of stuff, I agree, will stand the test of time because when you get down to the root emotions of the thing, it's a problem in a relationship with somebody that you love and you absolutely want to work it out, but you're having a little bit of difficulty working it out right now, that's never going away. That's never not going to be a thing that people can relate to.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think again too, that's like a through line of maybe all 4 of these songs. They all have really relatable stories that go along with them. And that's a big piece of music for me too. Like the lyrics and the relatability, something that I feel like I'm seen whenever I hear it is important to me. And that's, I think, different than somebody that creates music for a living. Like, I just live it and feel it, and it's my favorite language to converse in. And so the things that are important to me about songs are different. And again, I just, it's why I do the show. It's why I will always talk to people about music until I cannot talk anymore because it's just the thing that I feel most connected to people through.
Yeah, I mean, we joke a lot about how we live in separate areas now, but there's been many times where we've all been in the same place. We've gotten together, we've recorded a show for an hour and a half at least, talking about music, and then we go to a bar and talk about music for 4 more
Yeah.
hours, and still have not run out of things to say.
Same.
Yeah,
Same, and, like, making playlists and stuff like that, people are like, "Aren't you done? Like, aren't you tired of making playlists?" I'm like, "I'll never be tired of making
yeah,
playlists."
yeah. I have so many on my in my Spotify account. It's hundreds and hundreds of playlists that are just
Same.
like, this is what I felt like on a Tuesday night in September in 2019. And like,
Yeah.
oh, I go back and listen to it. I'm like, oh yeah, that's actually not too bad. That's pretty good.
I have great taste.
Yeah,
If
exactly.
nothing else, it's a
Yeah,
reminder of what great
exactly.
taste we have.
Let me pat myself on the back. I have fantastic taste. Yes.
Everybody should be listening to my playlist.
You know, something that we used to do, and we don't have time to do it anymore, and it's a shame. Are you familiar with the game Apples to Apples?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
So we used to do that with playlists where we would put
Okay.
out a word and then people would have to put together either a 3 or a 5 song playlist, depending on how many people were participating that epitomize that word. And then one person would be the judge and listen to it, and somebody would win, and you kind of repeat it week to week. I always thought that was very cool because the interpretations that some people had of like the word like meandering or like turbulent or something like that are just so different from
Yeah.
what everyone like. I would listen to a playlist of, I have no idea where you came at this. How did this strike that in your head? But also I can kind of see it after listening to it 5 or 6 times. I'm like, oh, this does sound kind of turbulent. That's pretty good. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. And if you ever want to bring that podcast back, you let me know, because I think that would be a fun one to have like a male female perspective on. So
Yeah.
much of music
Oh, that wasn't even a
podcasting.
podcast. That was just our
Oh, that
good
was just
friends throwing
fun.
it back and forth. That
Oh,
was just for
I'm
fun.
like,
Yeah, we're just
well,
doing it for the hell
then
of it. Yeah.
I'm all okay. Super Awesome Mix Network. We have one more idea.
Yes. Honestly, take
Apples
it.
to
Do what you
apples.
want with it. I don't have the time for this anymore. I'll participate, but I don't have the time. It was a lot of time. You
It
get like
is.
5 or 6 people giving you a 5-song playlist, and you're like, oh, that's a lot. It's a lot
It's a
to
lot.
go through in a week.
It definitely is, but I love the concept, and again, I think it showcases like how different songs and different music and even different words inspire different things in different people. That's just cool to me that it's not universal. So many of the songs that we sing collectively, I think of like the happy birthday song or whatever,
Yeah.
like to be able to split off from that and then like really go deep on a song that you love and have like two completely different reasons for why you love it is just so cool to me. Like, and
Yeah.
it's still communal and it still matters, even though it's not experiencing it the exact same way.
Yeah. And
It's good.
it's a way to relate to people, know what their state
It
of mind
is
is. Yeah.
totally true. Well, Tom, thank you so much for sharing what you're listening to this week. As I mentioned in the opening, I love your podcast. It is one of the only podcasts, too, where I find myself yelling at the radio, where I'm like, no, you guys are wrong. That's wrong. Stop it. Or like, oh, that's so on the money. Like, it's so hilarious. Like, if I'm driving and listening and I'm by myself, I'll find myself at a stoplight and people are looking over at me like, who is she talking to?
We get that a
So,
lot. We get a lot of people who are like, this is why you're wrong. And we're like, yeah, fair
okay.
point. Yeah.
But it's engaging. That's great. I don't want to just sit there passively. Like I want to have an emotional connection and a feeling around the show. And I think you guys do such a great job at that.
Yeah.
So
We've always
listen,
said you're gonna know way more about your favorite band than we will in a week.
yeah.
And so yeah, we're gonna get some stuff wrong. It's part of the charm.
Yeah, and I think that there's like so much of it is right, and you guys take such a deep dive that it's like, you can tell that you're smart guys. You're not just like riffing in a locker room. Do you know what I mean? Like a lot of male dominated podcast shows often are just, I don't know, they're not for me. But you guys do it right. It's smart, it's funny, it's well researched. Like I said, I love the segments. So, huge fan. And listeners, if you are not familiar with 1001 Album Complaints, it's 10 out of 10. I highly recommend, and you can find the podcast everywhere you get podcasts. So definitely check it out. And as always, please be sure to follow, download, and share this show. And if you love listening, drop a review on Apple or Spotify for us. And last but not least, to stay informed on all things Super Awesome Mix and what are you listening to, be sure to follow us on Instagram at Super Awesome Mix. Thanks for listening, and please join me again next week to find your new favorite song.